Where?
Indy like
And
it
here
matters.
we are, in the ways
I'll just leave it right there.
It's still Wednesday. And we are continuing our way through Act 73. Everything okay?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Okay. So we're gonna go through more sections of the bill with Ron Grady. Welcome, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Hello, everyone. I know that I could use a haircut, but here I am.
If you don't say, we won't notice.
So, okay.
It's even with the haircut.
See if this pops up. I
Wow.
know, isn't it beautiful?
Whoa. Is that
My-
food?
My haircut doesn't match it.
Very
but,
comfortable.
Okay. Here we go.
Wait,
So,
the ante there, team.
Oh,
have that
you'll
expectation
never
from
see
me.
anything like that.
okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, we got some faded.
Okay, all right. So where are we? I presume you just heard from Beth. I frankly wasn't listening in, but I'm sure that was great. So we're at section 34
Indeed, we are.
and just situating within the statutes, we're going to start with, we're in Title 16. So we're dealing with your state funding of public education chapter, and then we'll jump a little bit later into your education property taxes piece. So just, these are the first sets of sections, primarily in Title 16. So you're going to have the creation of your foundation formula. That's your base amount and weights. We've got some cleanup to a couple of places. We have updates to the ed fund to reflect new revenue streams, and then the creation of that supplemental district spending reserve, and then a few reports coming in, and then finally some transitionary measures. So I'm sure Beth talked about this, but your effective dates broadly, you can think of the foundation formula rollout as contingently effective July 1, 2028. The non-July 1, 2028 dates you see up here are reports are effective on passage, of course, to go ahead and start that work. And then there's a piece related to delaying the first meeting of the Ed Fund Advisory Committee, which was also effective on passage. This is your contingency language. So just note that there's two pieces to this. So July 1, 2028, and it's provided that new school districts have assumed responsibility for the education of all resident students and that you've received the foundation formula report under 45A, which I'll come to, and given the General Assembly an opportunity to enact legislation. So I'm going to keep doing this thing with a table throughout.
No, go for it.
In part, I'm showing the table throughout because I want to kind of jump by topic rather than sequentially within the act. I'll try to largely follow the section ordering of the act, but because some sections group together more naturally, I'll keep coming back to this table just so you can see what we've done and what we'll do next. So first is core foundation formula, creation of your base and weights, educational opportunity payment. That's sections 34 and 35. In section 34, we create your base amount of $15,033 per pupil. It is inflation adjusted. We also create the educational opportunity payment, your EOP. And just for folks out there, the way that you determine that is you take your base amount, that $15,033, and you multiply it by your district's weighted long-term membership. And that gets you a figure that reflects the cost of educating the students within the district. That's your EOP. We also, in section 34, repealed and updated the current education funding concepts. Currently, we use education spending as the concept. That's been repealed because we're switching to this EOP. Section 35, I don't have the numbers up here. If you're interested, I can flip to the act to show you, but just high level, section 35 is your amendments to the pupil weighting section. And basically what you're left with is a grade level weight for pre-K. There's no other grade level weight provided. You have a slight update to the economic disadvantage weight. In existing law, there is an EL and English language learner weight, but that's been built out, refined for different categories based on proficiency level and formal education level. I've also added special education weights that are distinguished by disability cost, and those are replacing your census block grant. And then finally, repealing the small school and sparsity weights. As you'll recall, and we'll come to this shortly, there are support grants in place of those weights.
And so when we think of, so the grade level weight for pre-kindergarten is something that we're going to start work on this week. the E, and then the special education weights. There's a report that I think isn't due until
The end of this, yeah,
the
yeah,
end of this year.
exactly.
So it wouldn't be acted on until next year to look at if if special education weights distinguished by disability cost is the best way to do special education weights.
And
Just in terms of me continuing to flag like very obvious next steps. And then the small school sparsity weight, we're gonna hear from the Board of Ed about their recommendations on that next week, probably.
And so that report that the chair references, that's exactly the report in the contingent effective date. It's also going to contain in that report suggestions on potential different geographic measures for sparsity. So something you could look at as well. Next, we'll jump to those support grants. So we've got section 37 adds support grants for both small schools and sparse schools. You can see the dollar figures up here, but what's worth noting is the eligibility conditions. These are slightly different than an existing law. So a small school must have less than 100 pupils in 2-year average enrollment. And then what's important here, an annual determination by the state board to be small by necessity under standards established in section 8B. I think the state board came out with some standards, and the expectation is that AOE would actually do the annual determination. But two pieces, you have an objective criterion, right? Less than 100 pupils in 2-year average enrollment, and then also a required annual determination that you are small by necessity. So not just a numerical check, are you small by necessity? Similar setup for the sparse schools. You must be in a city, town, or incorporated village. That's the geographic measure that may be updated. You may recall last year we talked about zip code or other alternative measures. So there may be more to come on that, but for now, Act 73 has city, town, or incorporated village with less than 55 persons per square mile residing within the land area. And again, an annual determination state board to be sparse by necessity.
Yeah, Representative.
Yeah, thank you. Are small and sparse additive?
You can receive both grants.
You can
That's
receive
it.
both.
Yep.
Thank you.
But there's nothing, they're not inherently locked. So you could
Okay.
receive one, you could receive the other, you could receive both.
Thank you.
Which is different than current law.
Yep.
Did you?
I did, could you just remind me, 100 pupils, is that bodies or average or weighted?
That's actual bodies. 2-year average enrollment is not a weighted count.
Yeah.
Representative Holcomb.
Speaking of a school I know where this would actually incentivize them to become a smaller school. Is there any kind of transition like threshold, or is this just a hard clip?
It's just a hard clip. I mean, it may be dependent on what the standards for small by necessity or sparse by necessity are. I'm not sure if they've thought about the incentive effects.
They do.
So that'll be a great conversation when we tackle that. Yeah.
As you might expect, we have to do a bunch of repeals for existing ed concepts to create the foundation formula. So just noting these repeals here, some of these are technical. You'll see at the bottom, census grant, that's removed because you now have your special education weights. You see the English learners services categorical A piece. Again, we built out that English learners weight. This one will be super quick, just a couple of cleanup changes in these sections. So sections 36 and 40 make conforming changes to pick up references to EOP and the supplemental district spending. Section 39 removed some archaic language from the enactment of the stabilization reserve that just references the act in which it was enacted. So it's purely cleanup. And I hinted at this earlier, but section 45C delays the first meeting of the Ed Fund Advisory Committee. It was originally scheduled to meet over this past summer, and that's been delayed a year to this summer.
And the Ed Fund Advisory Committee was created in 2020.
2 years, yeah. Before me,
Okay.
the Ed Fund Advisory Committee, and we have an update later to some of the directives to pick up the changes that happen in the foundation formula. And also, I think they look as well at the homestead exemption or some impacts from the homestead exemption. So next, there's just a couple of changes that have to happen in Title 16 with the creation of the supplemental district spending. You may recall that the supplemental district spending is actually done in Title 32, part of the property tax system, but you need to pick up those revenues in the Ed Fund. You need to change the budget vote to reserve. So Section 38 just changes the Ed Fund to pick up those revenues. The way to think about it is you get all of the revenues from the supplemental district spending tax that flow to the ed fund. And then separately, a reserve is created within the ed fund that picks up the recapture, which I'll talk about in more detail later. One of the big things in Act 73 is Section 41 changes the way that the school budget votes. So the school budget is no longer a vote on the entirety of your budget for your school district. You're going to have your EOP that you receive. So the budget that you're voting on is just on spending that is supplemental to that, your supplemental district spending. And that would be the spending that you do above your educational opportunity payment. The budget would show that proposed supplemental district spending. And then one of the functions of the system is that you could do a mathematical exercise to show the actual supplemental district spending tax rate that would have to be imposed to raise those funds. It's a little bit different than the current structure where there's more ambiguity around what your actual property tax implications are going to be. This tells you that supplemental district spending tax rate. And then Section 43 creates that reserve that I talked about. It's where the recapture is stored. The recapture is the excess funds that are raised through the imposition of the supplemental district spending tax. Those can be used for two purposes. One is if there have been any miscalculations in getting in those supplemental district spending, you could offset any miscalculations there. And then potentially more substantively, you could decrease following year statewide education property tax rates with any remaining recapture. And depending on the school district configuration, could be sizable, could be not. So waits to be seen. Few reports in these sections from AOE, the transportation reimbursement grant report. So guidelines for minimum transportation to be provided and covered. JFO reporting on inflationary measures and funding for pre-K and early care. And then the big report, the Section 45A report, which is that piece of the contingency for the effective dates, tasks JFO with contracting contractors to recommend by the end of this year updates to the foundation formula to move away from special education weights to reliance on special education services, to consider, to update any other weights as empirically necessary, examine suitable sparsity measures, costs of secondary students, and whether a weight would be warranted, and account for CTE within the formula. So pretty broad expanse here. And while the directives for the foundation formula sound sort of specific, you can think of it as quite broad because they end up examining all of the weights to determine if they're empirically necessary. They could be touching the entirety of the foundation formula. So that's expected end of this year and would be part of that review that the General Assembly would go through in meeting that contingency for rollout of the formula.
I believe the JFO is just finishing up that contract now. I don't
The RFP or awarding it?
know awarding it. But I don't think they are done. Does anyone, I feel like there's been way fewer questions, and it might just be that John is exquisitely clear. But is everyone's good so far? Okay, yeah, Representative Maslin.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward stuff.
Okay,
So
I love that.
fully owned. Okay,
So that's okay.
Thank you.
Representative Brannigan.
And he did say he was going back over it in detail, so that
Okay,
maybe where some
Great.
questions are waiting.
okay, cool. I think it's just the incredible formatting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The table is working.
That's what I wanted to hear. Okay. I didn't know if it was effective, but this is great.
Yes.
I wonder, we have nothing, I just want to make sure that there's nothing in the foundation formula to pay for school construction, new school construction whatsoever. And nothing contemplated in there except for creating the special fund elsewhere in the bill, but the legislature just has to allocate money to it.
I think that is a fair statement. Yeah.
Worried. I sense you're worried.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Okay. Lastly, in these sections, we can talk about the transition. In the first years of your rollout, you're going to be switching from, local budgets, locally varying homestead rates onto a new fixed EOP that's just a function of the student count that you have and the weights that accompany them. So your transitionary period for fiscal years 29 through 32, you're going to move off of ed spending and onto the EOP. The way that this is done, just in simple math, you identify the gap between your district's FY25 ed spending and what the FY29 EOP would be. So for your school district, that would be base 15,033 times your weighted long-term memberships. You determine what that difference is. And then basically you prorate that gap over those years so that you transition each year. If your school district is below what your EOP will be in FY '29, you're incrementally moved upward to what your EOP will be. So that by FY '33, you would be fully transitioned onto the EOP. And then if you're a school district that currently spends above what your EOP would be in FY '29, you're incrementally moved down over those years.
I have a question. If a school district were to make certain choices with the money, that it's more money that it's gonna be getting, say they were really only spending 11 and now they're 15%. And we don't have the school construction formula ready yet, so that they can't say, oh, no, let's plan with these two other schools, build something or build on something. Because we don't know what help we're gonna get. And so they have more money to spend. And they make decisions that actually don't get them to, they can spend more, but their school's class size is still gonna be too small, and they've got years before it has to be really large enough to get to where we're trying to aim to, a little bit larger class sizes. Would it be a constitutional issue if we were to release less of the foundation formula to those school districts until they were trying to meet whatever educational goals were being set?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. I think the premise of your question is that the EOP is miscalculated for them, is the way that I.
No, it's actually not. That's not it. It's that if we are, well, when we pass Act 60, suddenly schools had more money to spend. A lot of them. Some had less. Some of them were spending more than the block grant. It was $5,000, I think, at the time. And so, but some people were spending $2,500 per student. So all of a sudden they had $2,500 more per student to spend. And because there was really no help for them to try to figure out how they might spend that money. It was spent in ways that didn't necessarily make learning outcomes for students better, just put more money into what they were already doing. So if we want to avoid that happening this time, I'm wondering if we can not release so much money, not just a phase in, but a phase in that's linked to attaining educational goals.
Carl, the question that I would ask you, I'm sorry, Representative Odie, ask you about this, and I don't know if we need to get this deep into this for this initial walkthrough, is are we also going to be enforcing those same pursuit of education goals for districts that are already spending that much? Like, so, you know, it's sort of a question of fairness there. I think that's a good question to keep on thinking about.
Yeah.
But I want us to really focus on what is here rather than what we want to change, just because I think it's really important for us to understand what actually is in the law that we passed before we start like tinkering with it.
Additional questions. I'm thinking that if this is about adequacy, and if this amount is an adequate amount to educate students, and if we fail to fully fund an adequacy amount, then is it actionable in court?
Mhm.
And if it is, then I'm not sure we can do anything other than to fund full EOP to a district, regardless of how they intend to spend the money.
Yeah, I think there's also really, like, there's lots of national research on whether you should fund more when someone's not meeting educational quality standards to help them get to educational quality standards versus penalize them fiscally, right? There's,
I'm not.
It's a big national debate.
realized.
yeah,
I
Yeah.
could say more up here, but,
Representative Holcomb?
I was just gonna say, I'm having a hard time with this conversation because I think we need to talk about what improves learning, and that's ed policy, but I think you should put that question to them, which is if you get more money, what is it used for? And I would just like to respectfully point out that some of the biggest achievement gaps in the state are in some of the vulnerable highest performing districts. And so the way the federal government handles that is categorical grants, because it's not about this low funding, low, high poverty district, not knowing what they're doing. It's that we just systematically have to pay attention to whether kids are getting a good chance. Like some of the districts that we think of as amazing districts. And the task force found data that says that the independent schools is the same thing. They have some of the biggest achievement gaps, with the exception of Bedford. And it's just, the question is whether you're actually doing what it takes to help kids learn better. And that's not our question.
okay.
Perfect. So,
Wait, can you go back a second?
yes.
Does everyone see sort of the mechanism that's here? Okay, great.
So just high level summary of all the sections we've gone through thus far, created a foundation formula, base amount 15,033 per pupil, updated your weights, that's pre-K, special education, economic disadvantage, English language learner. You've created the educational opportunity payment to school districts based on their weighted long-term membership. To replace some of the repealed weights, you have supplementary support grants for small schools and sparse schools. And then now your budget vote is exclusive to your supplemental district spending, and it displays the required supplemental district spending tax rate to produce those funds, which may result in recapture, which we'll talk about shortly. I got more tables for you, but now we're jumping to section 46. So this is jumping into education property tax changes.
Oh,
Before you jump on, all of the stuff regarding the foundation formula, all those are contingent upon formation of new districts. If we don't have new districts, foundation formula is not going to take effect.
You're correct that the way Act 73 is written, the contingency for the effective date is two pieces. You have that report you received, but the second is that the new school districts contemplated by the Act have assumed responsibility for education of students. So if you don't have those new school districts, you don't have that contingency.
Yes, and I think this is a policy choice. What Vermont is choosing to do is treat poverty through schools. And the data we saw suggests that we spend about $2,000 more per kid in support services than our neighboring states. So that's a policy choice. We've decided as a state, the way to treat poverty for kids is in education.
back to you, John.
So jumping to education property tax changes, moving out of Title 16, we're going to be in Title 32 now. New table. So high level, this is the creation of your supplemental district spending. It's the imposition of your new statewide education tax rate in place of the locally varying homestead rates. Got some transitionary measures, updates to the December 1 letter to reflect the new formula, and then a new proposed homestead exemption, repealing that property tax credit, and then a report on the homestead exemption.
And reminder to folks that Julia and Ezra are going to come in all morning tomorrow and essentially run through the whole bill from their perspective. So we'll get, graphic, numbery representation of all the words that John's been talking about.
So just like our last table, most of these are continually effective in the same way that the foundation formula rollout is. The one exception you see on the left, July 1, 2027, that's your December 1 letter. If you think about it, to have that FY29 rollout, you need the December 1 letter recommendation in place before the FY20 rollout. So that's why you have a July 1, 2027 effective date for that. And then your report is, of course, effective on passage. Just showing the contingency again, but we just talked about this, so I'm not going to belabor it. First, we're going to start with probably the most complicated part of all the sections I'll cover. So this is your supplemental district spending, your set of definitions. I'll just say left side of the table is kind of the intuitive way to think about it. And then right column is continuing to go through the definition, but talks a bit more about the math that actually produces it. So this replaces the current funding formula language with new definitions for supplemental district spending. That's your spending that the voters of a district may approve above their EOP, up to a cap of 5% of the district's unweighted foundation amount. So this is an unweighted count on which that cap is determined. Also, just note, we'll come to it shortly, but there's going to be a transitionary measure for the cap as well. So it goes from 10% down to 5% over basically a 10-year period. So supplemental district spending that's above EOP, it's voted locally, it's raised locally up to a cap of 5% of that unweighted foundation amount. And note that it's imposed uniformly across districts. I don't mean to say that everyone's paying a tax, but it's that everyone will pay a tax in the same way to raise the same amount of funds if you do elect to vote for supplemental district spending. To raise that supplemental district spending, a district must impose the rate that would be required to raise those funds in the lowest taxing capacity district. That's kind of the most intuitive way to think about the way that you're raising these funds. That's the equalization measure that's enacted in Act 73. Like I noted, it's raised entirely locally. And the way that it works is we've benchmarked the rates to the school district with the lowest taxing capacity district. And that is your district anticipated to have the lowest grand list per long-term membership in the upcoming fiscal year. Intuitively, the way to think about that is who has the least property wealth available per student on which to raise funds. That's your lowest taxing capacity district. And the way that this is put into action is through the supplemental district spending yield, which is unlike the current yields you're familiar with. And all this does is it identifies how much could you raise effectively at a 1% rate at $1 per $100 of equalized education property value. How much could you raise at that rate in your lowest taxing capacity district?
And one question I just want to put into the ether, and I don't think we can have a conversation about it today, is if I'm getting sort of regular questions about like, what if some portions of this bill get enacted and other portions of the act don't get enacted, right? And so if we don't have new districts and all the rest of the legislation moves forward, how low would that benchmark be? Because my guess is the lowest taxing capacity district would be much lower than it would be under new districts. And so that's just like an interesting question for us to be moving forward, an interesting to me question to be moving forward with.
Yeah, one of the most live parts of figuring out the equalization measures from last year was what the school district configuration would be. If you have existing school districts, that band between your lowest and highest is going to be substantially larger than if you had, say, 5 proposed school districts that consolidate a lot of pieces. So the equalization measures will likely need to be re-examined depending on school district configurations. The end result of applying the supplemental district spending tax is that because you're taxing everyone at the rate that would have to be used in the lowest capacity district to produce those funds, every other district is going to produce extra funds, right? If you're a district that's close to the lowest taxing capacity district in available property wealth per pupil, you might just produce a little bit of extra funding. But if you're a substantially wealthier district and you apply that same rate, you're going to produce extra funds. And that's what we call the recapture. So that's your excess revenue. And as we talked about before, that flows first into the ed fund and then is reserved after payout of the supplemental district spending funds. It's reserved within the supplemental district spending reserve, where it can be used to lower following year property tax rates. Going to pause. That is the most complicated thing in the whole bill. So
I think we spent a lot of time on that, right? And I was not very touched after it left us in the grand scheme of things. Yes.
This is a piece where we originally talked about possibly, some of that money could go towards the, construction fund.
Mhm. Yes.
But we reverted it. The tax abatement.
It's also the one where we did some of our best diagram work.
you guys came up with a 3-word title for something.
That's Marty.
Yes, and the district, what does the education property district look like? Is that what we have now?
I'm sorry,
The district that we're taxing.
Oh, it's just, I mean, we have the current school district configuration that we have. So it's the same as that currently, but if you change, depending on what the legislature does, if you change your school district boundaries, then that would track that, right? It would be a decision that's made locally because those funds are raised locally. So whatever the bounds of the district are, that's the bounds within which that tax are administered.
Okay, thank you. And the recapture, John, I'm sorry, what? me what that is again.
Yeah, so that's when you apply that supplemental district spending tax, if you are any district other than the lowest taxing capacity district, because you're applying the rate that would be required in that district, raises some extra funds. So the wealthier you are effectively, the more extra funds you raise. You're applying a rate that is higher than necessary to raise just the funds that you're trying to raise based on your property tax base, but it's set at the rate that is required in the lowest taxing capacity district. And so because you have more property wealth available, but you're applying the same rate that would be applied there, it makes extra funds available, and that's your recapture.
And we were sending that somewhere.
It goes first to the ed fund, and then it's reserved within a reserve in the ed fund where it can be used to lower following year property taxes or correct for any miscalculations that happen. I love this transition because it's so simple. I don't even have to explain anything. You can just see that the cap, that 5% cap, there's a rollout period for that. So for the first 5 years, you have a 10% cap, and then you drop down by 1% the cap each year, so that in FY 2038, you're finally at the statutory cap of 5%. But in those early years, there would be a 10% cap available for the supplemental district spending, and this is just part of the easing mechanism for getting folks onto the foundation. So to implement all of these changes, we have section 47. We're amending section 5402. This is your core education property tax liability. This is what currently houses the imposition of the education property tax rate, your homestead, non-homestead tax rates. What's happening in the bill is that you're replacing your existing property tax mechanism, which currently fully funds locally voted school budgets, accounting for that variation through varying homestead rates. And it's replacing that with a statewide education tax. That rate is what everyone's paying across the state. Of course, you still have the CLA and the statewide adjustment. So it's not as if everyone's going to see the exact number on the bill.
But CLA changes should be a lot less as we implement more regular reappraisals around the state.
That sounds wonderful.
Doesn't it? Thanks for believing in it, John.
As someone who has strong feelings that I won't state about the statewide adjustment, I like that. So, replacing locally varying homestead rates with a statewide education tax. Note that you would still be adjusting that tax. You may recall that table that lists the different tax classifications. You'd adjust by a statutory factor for each different property tax classification as set out in Act 73. And Kirby will talk about this. You've got homestead, non-homestead, non-residential, and non-homestead residential. Currently, you just have statutory factors of 1. So effectively, you have one statewide education tax. But the way to think about it is these are levers you can pull. Depending on the statutory factors that you use, you can assign different liabilities to different kinds of properties, right? So I think you'll be receiving recommendations, if you haven't already, on what those statutory factors would be. Lastly, you have to actually impose the local supplemental district spending tax. It's done in much the same way that the statewide is, but it's raised entirely locally. You still have that application of CLA and statewide adjustment. Section 48 is your December 1 letter updates. You're, of course, repealing the recommendations for the existing yields. You no longer need to have a locally varying homestead rate. And instead tasks the Commissioner of Tax with recommending a statewide education property tax rate. Just to think about in relationship to the current structure, when you receive the December 1 letter now, you're anticipating the budgets that are going to be passed, right? And you're trying to come up with a yield that will actually fully fund all the local decisions that are made. It's different in the future structure for the foundation formula because the funds that need to be raised are a function of base times weighted long-term membership. So it's a bit more mathematical, but there would still be questions lingering. What are other revenues that are coming into the ed fund and the like, but it's going to look a little different than existing December 1 letter. And I think that the hope was that it might be less uncertainty around what arrives in that letter.
John, I can't remember the intent language because it's intent language. But can you sort of remind me, clarify for me, how much, I remember conversations about that as we're setting the statewide education tax, the money from the extra supplemental district spending and the new second home tax and a few other things would all be sort of used to bring the statewide education tax as sort of low as the lowest existing
Uh,
property tax.
I-
I don't remember how much.
I recall what-
Made it in there.
So I think we have, it may even be beyond intent language. I definitely recall this language. It may relate to,
The report.
I think in one of the Department of Tax reports, we asked for consideration, or you guys asked for consideration of statutory factors or other determinations that ensure that the creation of new features here don't fall on the statewide education property tax rate. So trying to account for the new structures and not increasing folks' homestead tax rate. So that language definitely made it in. I'm not sure what section, and it might be in a report. Yeah. The other thing that will come in your December 1 letter is the supplemental district spending yield.
That kind of-
And unlike the existing yields, which again would be dependent on budgets that hadn't yet been passed, the supplemental district spending yield is a bit more mathematical. If you can just identify your lowest taxing capacity district and you ask what they could raise at a $1 rate per $100 of equalized education property value, that will tell you what your supplemental district spending yield is. So again, hopefully greater certainty in the December 1 letter. And then sections 49 and 50 just make some conforming changes to make sure that we're referencing the statewide education tax rate as opposed to differentiating when we don't need to between the non-homestead and homestead. That will naturally be adjusted by the statutory factors for the different property tax classifications. We also have a transition for the homestead rate that folks are going to see. So that's over fiscal years 29 through 32. It's much the same structure as the transition you've seen previously for your EOPs. You determine the gap. So what is your FY 29 statewide homestead rate? Again, that's the rate that's going out to everyone. You're no longer in a locally varying homestead rate structure. So take that FY 29 rate and then determine the difference between that and the district's FY 28 homestead rate. So what is that gap? And then we create a yearly adjustment to the statewide homestead rate that's prorated across those 5 years. So incrementally moving folks whose homestead rate in FY 28 was above the statewide homestead rate downward. And similarly, folks whose homestead rate was below the statewide homestead rate in FY 29, they will be incrementally moved upward to that FY 29 homestead rate. It is worth noting that the gap is a fixed gap. It's not determined on a yearly basis, right? It's that FY 29 and FY 28, which means you are making an adjustment that's sort of a best guess as to what's going to be happening across the following years. But the idea is to kind of have a smooth transition. Switching gears a little bit, we have our property tax credit repeal and the creation of the homestead exemption. So your new income sensitivity measures. Section 52, which is a huge section because it's amendments to a whole chapter. It repeals the property tax credit and creates that new homestead property tax exemption. Just important to note conceptually the difference between a credit and an exemption. This actually reduces the amount of house site value that is subject to education taxes. So unlike the existing structure where you pay your taxes on the full value of the property and then receive a credit against those taxes, this actually reduces the tax liability that you have. Only a certain percentage of the house site value would be subject to education taxes. Much like the property tax credit, but with different figures, you have new income sensitivity measures, and this goes up to households with not more than $115,000 in household income. It is worth noting that unlike the existing structure where you can't just look at the statute and see where the benefits cut off, because that's a function of where the income yield and property yield meet each other, and those are based on determinations made when you set the yields. In this structure, you can actually see where the benefit cutoff is, right? The homestead exemption is only available for households with not more than $115,000 in household income, and it provides a range of household exemptions. The lower your income, the higher the exemption you receive. So if you're in the bottom bracket, which is 0 to 25,000 in household income, you would get 95% homestead exemption against the first 425,000 in house site value. And then if you're at the top end of that, so you make 114,000, you would get a 10% homestead exemption against that value.
Representative Page?
I'm just curious, with the new homestead exemptions, I'm assuming that you'd have to file just like the old,
You still need to make a homestead declaration. Yep. Yeah, that whole structure will continue to persist. There's still homestead rate, there's still the declaration, and then that would go into your homestead exemption. Yep.
So we are receiving some, they're gonna change the forms, and that's part of one of our conversations this year with the tax department.
Speaking of which, the section 53 report is tasking the Department of Tax reporting by the end of this year on a potential alternative homestead exemption structure. Included in that would be updates to the forms, but also an analysis of the implications of moving to income sensitive measures that could recognize households of up to $175,000 in household income. Of course, the more exemption that you extend, you still got to make up the funds somewhere. So that's always the balancing act that folks are trying to strike.
Yeah, I just sort of a reminder, I think one of the big reasons we stopped at the cutoff we stopped at is because we really don't have very good data over that spot, because we've never collected that data before because the benefit wasn't available. Representative Bodie.
So I'm wondering if the report will also include how this impacts each county.
Is that in the?
I don't think there's anything that specific. I can check and see. I mean, I can jump to it right now if you want to look at section 53.
Or you could ask the tax department when they come in, just if they could include that as a request, even though it's not in the statute. They have a whole more year to work on that report. Right?
And then just so I don't miss it, section 51, we just codify the statutory purpose of exceptions. Pretty intuitive here. Decrease property tax liability for households with low and moderate household income. And then end with a whimper again, just conforming changes to update references to the property tax credit, and then updating your directives to the Ed Fund Advisory Committee to address those updates for the foundation formula rollout and the homestead exemption. And that's really it. So the section we just went through, the education property tax changes, you're replacing locally varying homestead rates with statewide education tax that would be adjusted for tax classification, which Kirby will talk about in more detail. Impose that supplemental district spending tax to raise funds locally voted with equalization measures included, which produces recapture. You're repealing property tax credit, and you've created a homestead exemption with new income sensitivity measures. And just so you guys know, I don't know that everyone realizes this, we do have act summaries. So if you want to click on this link, there's a 2-page, very dense thing that says all the things we just
Actually,
did.
already separately on the page for today.
That's perfect.
I love a hot link. Thank you. Another.
No, I gotta have the.
You really had a good time.
How much time are you going to on the offset?
Representative Lee, did you? Oh, okay, okay, cool. Thank you. Onwards to Kirby. No PowerPoint, Kirby? No PowerPoint?
Well, just like John, I need a haircut. Unlike John, I don't have a fancy PowerPoint.
It wasn't a complaint. I was just making sure we sort of had the things.
Yeah, we only need about 12 pages.
Yeah,
To go over, 2 major areas, so hopefully we won't need fancy PowerPoint. So what we're gonna go over are the tax classification system that are set up under Act 73, which essentially comes down to creating one new tax classification to potentially be taxed at a different rate, as John mentioned. And then there's a regional assessment district, so let's not forget the RADs, and we'll be talking about those as well. So I don't know if I said this, but Kirby Keaton Legislative Council. Property classifications. As a quick reminder, there was some language in here at the beginning of this that was from VCGI. They wanted a change to how parcels defined for the grand list related to mapping. So that's what the language is on the screen there. It's related to that. It's not related to the rest of the stuff we'll be talking about. And then section 61 of Act 73 proposes a new statutory section, 4152A. setting up property tax classifications starting in 2028. I assume Beth talked about the contingent effective dates earlier, so this is also part of those contingent effective dates. And since this is the end of the act, we can take a look at the effective dates as well while we're in here. So for our purposes, the crucial part for tax classifications is this non-homestead residential classification, which is new. It is carved out of what we think of as non-homestead now. It's taking the residential properties out of that. The idea was to get at second homes and short-term rentals, and then leaving long-term rentals to be taxed like non-homestead, non-residential, which is, this category is essentially what you mostly think of as non-homestead right now, right? Crucial thing to be aware of right now is the definition for non-homestead residential. The conversations that are going to be had about tax classifications this session are going to come down to this, a lot of it. The definition that's in there right now is that non-homestead residential means a parcel or portion of a parcel for which a homestead was not declared and that has a residential property. And after a lot of different versions of this last session, what you landed on, what the General Assembly landed on was as defined by the commissioner by rule. So as to leave a lot of this definition up to the Department of Taxes as it's currently written. Jumping ahead momentarily to section 61B. Act 73 had the Department of Taxes issue a report on implementation of this. And that report was due already, and it exists.
And everyone's received that, and they are coming in next week. Is that right, Saoirse?
Next Tuesday afternoon.
Great, thanks.
Yep, a great discussion next Tuesday afternoon. That report's about 44 pages. Without the appendix part of it, it's about 26 pages, so it's not as long as it seems. But a lot of wonderful information in there, a lot of great points and things to think about. So that's a yet to come conversation to have.
And it really is like an implementation plan with decision points embedded in it that we can work through, which is
And going to the chair's question from before about the language relating to versions of the rate factors for the different classifications, and well, I'll just show you.
And I want to be clear, my question was about like intent around making sure that property taxes are not going to go up for districts that are spending very low now. And so the idea would be that everyone's property homestead taxes would sort of drop to the lowest level in the state.
So what their report does, and it has some great sections similar, I'm not sure if it's exactly capturing what you're saying, but the Act 73 had them include in the report to recommend sets of tax rate multipliers. One set recommended that would ensure any new revenue derived from the non-homestead residential classification would cover the cost of the ed fund of the property tax exemption, the homestead property tax exemption, in other words, the new version of the PTC. And another set that would ensure that any new revenue derived from the non-homestead residential classification would mitigate forecasted property tax increases on homestead payers. So they've done that in the report. Spoiler. I think it's pretty interesting. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of caveats with that because we don't know exactly once this is implemented, what the landscape is going to be. We don't know. So they did the best they could, it looked like, based off of what we know now. So great conversation for next Tuesday afternoon. So returning back to where I was, there's a lot of just administrative and technical parts to this, but the gist of this entire tax classification system section is to set up the non-homestead residential classification. And then there's a transition section in 61A, the Act. That would have, this is effective for January 1 of 2027, and this would be to have the Department of Taxes basically get the ball rolling on setting up new classifications next year. So what this means to you in part is that this puts a little bit of urgency on making sure that this is all set and ready to go this session. Because they're supposed to start transitioning next year. I already talked about the report that we have and the conversation that we'll be able to have about that later.
This seems like a good moment to plug that there is a timeline that's also uploaded that like some of these, there's so many different parts in the bill, and like even just this tiny part like actually does take all these years to implement with like necessary changes each year.
Mhm.
So that's just there if that helps people.
Yeah, so relating to this is first the transition, which I did skim over that a little bit. If you just think about transitioning to this new system, means you're not going to have any established data in the first year. So there needs to be some work done to get that off the ground. Yeah. Section 61C.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is, so the new property tax classification is all about work contingent on new districts.
It is under those contingencies. Now, and I was going to show you when we get the effective dates, I'll show you the language. So
Yeah, Representative.
I guess I don't understand why it would be. Wouldn't you try to move toward new classifications regardless?
Well, so we're moving forward with new classifications. I mean, we're moving forward the new, they wrote the report, they're following statute. There are two pieces. One is just like, frankly, sometimes bills pass because you put a lot of things in together. And then the other that is sort of less transactional is that we had a number of conversations in committee. And I think more conversations happened in the Senate and maybe in the Committee of Conference. It's all a little bit of a blur at this point, maybe for everyone. Yes. Kirby blur.
blur, but also conversation, yes.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. About the idea that, with the foundation formula implementation and district implementation and new tax category implementation, if they didn't all happen in the exact same year, you'd have like rapid swings in property taxes year over year that might take a long time to settle out. And that would be, especially in the aftermath of, I don't want to use the word aftermath, in the time after 127 implementation, that just seems, like maybe it should just, but if it all happened on the same time, then we could really like meet policy goals of like lowering homestead rates and stabilizing homestead rates.
Another question,
Yeah.
probably not for right now.
Okay, then let's ask it later and go back to Kirby.
Okay. So there's the contingency that's in the effective dates. Classifications was unique in a way of having two contingencies. So this part of Act 73 is also not only contingent on setting up the new school districts, but contingent on, so 61C and D go together. I jumped ahead here. So D makes this contingent on setting the tax rate multipliers before July 1st, 2028. So just so you're aware.
Can you explain the multipliers a little bit more before you?
Sure. So these are they're technically in John's sections, but under the not for Don or anything. I'm just pointing that out factually. But you're not going to see it here. That in the ed finance sections, where under current law in statute where it sets up the homestead rate and the non-homestead rate, that language has been changed in Act 73 to have factors for each classification. And under Act 73, those factors currently are set at 1.0, as in they're all the same. But those factors can be changed to increase the amount that one class of property pays compared with others.
And so like in a year over like a ongoing basis, we would just set one rate every year and then all of the sort of.
That's exactly right.
That
Would-
would be.
It's set up so that you can set one rate, but knowing that, just we'll use as an example, the non-homestead residential has a higher factor, so they're paying a higher share using your one rate.
And we would like we could set the multiplier once and then not touch it for a while.
That's the intention and the way that it's set up, that it doesn't have to be revisited unless you want to. So there's this prospective repeal, this in addition to the contingent effective date, that in order to ensure successful implementation of education finance reform, in the absence of legislative action on or before July 1st, 2028, that creates a new tax rate multiplier to be used in tax classification system. Subdivision F10 is the effective date, is repealed. So classifications get repealed unless you set multipliers before July 1st, 2028. And that's in addition to it being repealed if you don't follow the contingency language that we're going to look at.
Could you again explain,
Mhm.
you know, I think in simple terms, it means that the non-homestead residential rate is going to be higher than the other two. Just based on a bunch of other things that came in the tax department's report. But you had talked about the factors being different, but the rate being the same. So explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Let's, for one thing, I don't want to seem like I'm suggesting that any class gets taxed differently than any other. Like so it's a hypothetical when I say that, okay? Because right now, as it's written, they're all the same factors. That said, to explain how the factors work again is, let's say you have a rate of $1. But one of these classes has a rate of 2.0 and the other two have, or a factor, I mean to say, a factor of 2.0 and the other two have a factor of 1.0. Well, 2.0 is twice as much. So that rate would be multiplied by that factor and it would be the same as double the rate.
Yeah, thank you, because that's in simple terms what you're doing.
Okay.
It's double.
Yeah.
And I think it was actually 2 in the tax department, 3 in the tax department report, 1.39,
Mhm.
2,
Mhm.
for example.
Mhm.
A possibility.
Yeah, and that's a good place to look because they explain their different, versions of factors.
Okay, thanks.
And JFO can run through some more scenarios with us tomorrow, and then the tax department can run through more on next week.
So 61C is just an intent section saying that you intend to revisit the classification system as you go. That seems quaint at this point. I think that was a political negotiation at some point, but yeah. So I guess you can deem that you've done that now. Like this conversation satisfies
That's good.
you are right now reevaluating tax rate multipliers. Okay, so that's it for classifications. I say that's it, but of course, there's going to be some good conversations about that, and we have the tax department report. So moving on from there is the regional assessment districts. So as a reminder, and also, well, I want to put this into context and say that assessment districts and doing mass reappraisals, that's what this is about, is property valuation, right? In which our education tax system relies on that property valuation being done and being done well. That said, these sections probably least directly relate to everything else in Act 73 than the other stuff you're talking about. So just so that you're aware, and it even has its own timeline because unlike what we were talking about before, about certain parts of this kind of relying on other parts in order for it to work together. The timeline for this is January 1st, 2029. It's slightly after the other stuff. So while it does indirectly relate, it's not as central. So that just so that you can know that.
And the tax department has a report on this as well that they will come in on.
And last I checked, which was 20 minutes ago, I have not seen they published that report yet. But it's also not due yet.
I think that might have also been one of the reports that I said, it could be a slide deck. I don't remember.
A week, about a week.
Oh,
Yeah, but can confirm that that report, and we'll look at it, I think, here, there's a stakeholder working group. And they met, it looked like 4 times in the summer and fall. So regional assessment districts, as a refresher, the language here transitions Vermont from having, or potentially transitions Vermont from having a system where every municipality is in charge of its own reassessment. That's mass reappraisals of all the properties in that municipality, to moving toward more or less a county system. The assessment districts, as written here, are based off of counties, except that Franklin and Grand Isle are together and Essex and Orleans are together. It's a transition that takes place incrementally over to 2029. And at the end of it, the idea would be that these districts would go more or less 2 at a time every year to have every county reassessed every 6 years.
Representative Odie?
thank you. Was there? I think I asked this question before, so I can't remember. Those counties, in some counties, there are so many more parcels than in others. Did you take that into account?
Yes, that's why we lump the smaller ones together.
Yeah, the smaller ones, but are they like 1,000 parcels in those two and 1,000?
From what I remember from last year, the regional assessment districts will be roughly equal, except for Chittenden County, which just has a lot more.
And will there be more resources to complete that, or will they be given more time, or is it better to separate into 2 areas so that you can do them then?
I think these are all great questions to ask the tax department about when they come in with their.
Okay.
Sure. I would just say that they're pooling their resources. So they're already spending resources to do map reappraisals. And now
Every town.
every town is already, so like say in Chittenden County where, yeah, there's more parcels, they're already paying for getting those reappraised. Now they'll just be pulled together. And yeah, after this report comes out in about a week, from PBR, I'm sure they'll come in and they'll do follow up and they'll walk you through everything that they're thinking about.
They're already paying for it. You mean the state is already paying for it? Because the money goes to the community puts it in the bank or does something with it. They don't pay for anything.
State pays for some.
The LCT would say the state does not pay enough.
If I can, not only that, but going forward, like you say, we can talk to the tax department about this, but some towns aren't doing a reappraisal for 10, 12 years. So every 6 years.
30.
Right, so there's gonna be a large amount of money needed going forward to support this.
Okay, that's a good point. I know towns, I'm in Franklin County. Some of those towns haven't reappraised in 15 years.
I think that's why you did this, to try to get every municipality reappraised more regularly.
So I just want to, we already passed and the law is already being enacted and implemented that every district, every town needs to reappraise on a very regular, much more often cycle. So that need for those resources is already like enacted, moving forward, towns are doing it. This is to try to make it more efficient and effective when they do that. I think there's differences of opinion at the table about whether or not it will be more efficient and effective, but the actual need for the every 6 years is already like fully finished law and happening. And towns are very much moving forward with it.
This is so important to pay, obviously, for this new plan. Are we expecting the reappraisal people to come in?
Mhm.
And the director,
Yeah.
his name is escaping me right now.
Jill.
Jill, yeah. She's coming in shortly.
Yeah, when they finish the report, we'll have them come in and talk about the report. Yeah, they've been doing a lot of work on it.
There was testimony last year, as this was passing through committees, and yeah, I recall there being discussion that hopefully these changes under Act 73 will save money by, for instance, when it comes to contracting for certain things, having several municipalities together means that they can save money. Yeah.
If just,
Yes, Representative Wazza.
I want to like honor Kirby's time and focus on the legislative language, but the other piece that was important for that conversation was to assist those very small towns who are having trouble, who want to do their reassessment, but are having trouble finding the support to do that because folks won't take, some firms won't take the jobs for these small towns because it's just not worth their time.
And when we have towns that have not been appraised regularly or accurately or differently from town to town across the whole state, and we have a statewide property tax and a statewide grand list, it creates enormous inequities that other towns and taxpayers are paying for. Yeah. Do you have more things?
A few more things.
Great.
So we already talked about the report that's due January 15. So that's section 64 of Act 73. Just so when you receive this report, you can expect to have sections of the report that address the authority or authorities who will contract for and conduct reappraisals. This goes to what role should the state have, if any. The authority or authorities who will hear and decide property valuation appeals. Again, what degree should the state be involved in that? Amendments necessary to conform statute to the change from an April 1 to January 1 grand list assessment date, because that's wrapped up in this as well, is moving from having April 1 be the grand list date to using January 1st, which in theory, moving to January 1 gives you more time to do some of the other things that we do in education spending. And fourth, any other recommendation or recommended revisions to achieve a regionalized reappraisal system. Sections 65 through 69 were miscellaneous tax provisions. Would the chair like me to remind you what those were?
Does anyone need those? That was just as a reminder, like those were things that were in our miscellaneous tax bill that we put into this bill because they needed to be somewhere.
So
They have nothing to do with like the spirit of Act 73.
Did they get passed into law?
Yeah.
Okay, we're done.
It's too late now.
I mean, this whole thing got passed into law.
Right. So I said I would show you the contingent effective date language. So that's subsection F, the effective date section. So I'm going to read this just so you know, are aware of the actual wording. The following section shall take effect on July 1, 2028, provided so this is the contingency, that the new school districts contemplated by this act have assumed responsibility for the education of all resident students, and that the expert tasked with developing a cost factor foundation formula has provided to the General Assembly the report pursuant to section 45A to provide the General Assembly an opportunity to enact legislation in consideration of the report. And these are mostly things that Beth and John covered. Tuition repeals, transition to cost factor formula, educational opportunity payment transition, the new property tax credit system using the homestead exemption. But property tax classifications is part of this too. Don't you have any other questions? I think that's. I'll leave you with.
Thank you, Kirby. So same question I had after Beth's section. I think I've flagged the pieces that we're going to hear more testimony on. Setting the multipliers is not something that happens this year. We need to create new we need to like finish the guidance, finish the forms. They need to require that the forms go out. They need to receive the forms back so we know what the base is. And then we would set the multipliers. So that's all future legislature. Is there anything else that folks flagged that I didn't flag? Okay. Yeah.
Is there any way, and I know this has been done in the past, but we're shifting where cliffs fall.
Mhm.
And not just here, we're shifting in other bills, in other committees. And it used to be that when you looked at the data in migration, out migration, it's all between 60 and 100. I mean, we've extended benefits, but we're also, I'm hearing about this, especially in context of childcare subsidies, because the prices have risen and certain people no longer are subsidized at all. Childcare is actually getting more expensive, and particularly for the working professionals.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at this, and that's who it's going to hit as well. Have we mapped where those cliffs sit and what the cumulative impact is of those cliffs?
So you've asked this question a bunch of times and it's a fantastic question. And it's a really important thing for us to do because we did map all those cliffs 6 years ago, maybe. The staff person who did that is not at JFO anymore. And we've changed almost everything since then. It does need to be mapped. JFO is actively working on sort of what it would look like, what it would cost, all those things in order to do that again. We also have a 10-year tax study. Did everyone know that?
Yes.
I think I knew and I forgot. But it's time for the 10-year tax study again. And so they're going to be working on that and also looking for resources to finish that. And so those two things together actually makes a lot of sense because so much of our tax policy shapes those cliffs. So I think one thing we're going to need to do is when the budget comes through our committee is making sure that we're prioritizing that as part of like JFO's budget for the year.
And I wonder, obviously, we can't ask committees to model this, but even if people just flag could we do a grand list of where the cliffs are, just so people can be mindful if we just keep hitting the same.
Mhm. Yeah, but I don't know if we want to call it a grand list.
No, I'm
but-
not calling it a grand
Big
list.
list?
A big list, massive list.
Big list.
Unfortunately, we dragged Representative Page from healthcare, but I know that there is a cliff in healthcare. If you earn $100 more, it's an $11,000.
Yeah, that might be a
And
fun.
just cumulative, it is, the burden is crushing for some people.
And I will, at some point early last session, I asked like the whole of Ledge Council to flag any place of statute that we offered any sort of financial benefits to veterans. And they could do like, if they're all doing it simultaneously, it's less of a lift. So that's something that we can ask them to do too.
And the reason I'm asking is, I'm thinking about why I'm hearing so much. And a lot of it is the people we're hitting are the households with 2 working people. They're often professionals and they're often in the healthcare industry, for example.
Well, in your district, yes.
Yeah, and that's part of the shortage too. And so, I think, paradoxically, we could actually be driving costs up. So
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm ran into
Okay.
the same thing.
Yep.
In my
Yes.
Grocery store. So with the current 6-year rolling reappraisals, where can I find the information as to how much more that might come out of the general fund? I mean, there must be,
I think that's a great question for the tax department when they come in, or you could ask them in advance. Jill at PBR. Okay, with that, no one else has anything?
Well,
Yeah.
I think, as we look at this, the things that are contingent upon the school districts, if we want to look at things that we want to have implemented, even if the school districts don't get implemented. Love to have that discussion at some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. We'll schedule that one so people can think about it in advance.
I found sources, I could send a source to send to the committee. I found Beth's excellent list of all the reports of anyone. So,
It's posted.
oh, you did post it?
Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
And Julia also has a slightly different list of all the reports that I think she'll share tomorrow.
Talking about future meetings, did you think, Emily, that they would have, that JFO would have that big list, or whatever, ready really soon?
What big list?
The list of the cutoffs for help, people and who's being impacted?
No. So I think I can ask Ledge Council unofficially to start assembling that big list, but the actual analysis will take just months and months. And it's something that JFO would need budget for.
I'm not asking for, I
Yeah.
realize that, very
Yeah.
respectful, but it would be interesting to see if we're seeing a preponderance of
Yes.
at the same level, because
Yeah.
that would be important. But
Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up. We are back here at 1. If folks could be back promptly, that would be cool. We're gonna do our first run on the December 1st letter and the yield bill. And then we are going to the state of the state, so it'll be fairly condensed. It's really just gonna be a first pass, and then we're gonna go